Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow us, likes, double tap.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 Podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. We give you 3 short stories, 1 big story, and wins and losses. I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta, and we already had a pretty spicy prep time to get ready for this episode.
We did, and part of me wishes that we just recorded our prep time so that we would have some of the things that we get really fired up about available for you to kind of splice into our conversation. And your response was that we should just get better at doing that when we're actually recording the pod, which I think is true. But I think some of my hesitation with getting that spicy when we're actually recording the pod is my hesitation to be flying off with hot takes and my constant reining myself in on things that I want to make sure that I'm correct about and that I have full factual information about.
And you're not being mean to the people who are trying really hard. That
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
And all that.
Exactly.
But I'm going to do my best to poke the bear, guys, today to make sure we keep it nice and spicy on this episode. This episode's going to be about, really, where is Fort Worth better off today than it, pre-pandemic, or post-Betsy Price? How is Fort Worth doing? And so we got a lot to talk about, but let's first get into some short stories. Short story number 1.
Yeah, there was an article basically updating us on the status of the proposal to split Keller ISD. The Keller School Board has killed plans to split the district, citing costs associated with detachment. And they just are basically announcing that they realized that this was not going to save them any money, and that was their purported reason for doing this, even though a lot of people questioned that. The thing that I found interesting about this is that they, even in this announcement, left out the school board members that were left out in the beginning of the conversation, and they found out the same time the rest of us did that this was not going to be moving forward. And while they're happy about that, they still are extremely frustrated that these conversations and decisions seem to continue to be happening without all of the board members present and accounted for.
Yeah, and I think the real interesting part is how much still accountability and persistence should we have on. There should still be, I guess, responsibilities to breaking the Texas Opens Meeting Act, to trying to do things behind closed doors. And, because this was dangerous. When we had multiple different guests talking about Keller ISD on the podcast, we were talking about this was going to be a model of sabotaging public schools across Texas if this was pulled off. We got very close to the ledge of something that could have been the beginning and an example of crumbling public schools in Texas. So to me, it's awesome that this is not happening, but this casual response of, "Oh, we're pulling this back because it's about money," I don't think we should stop the pressing of still the mishandling of the process, and also we need to accelerate discussing how do we get clear on that one law that they were trying to say that this is okay to do. So there seems some tidy up work we need to do because maybe someone more bolder would try to jump in.
I think there has been legislation proposed that would make it clearer that you can't do this without a vote. I think somebody actually has submitted that at the legislature since they are in session presently. So hopefully that will result in that. To your point about not just saying, oh, they did their financial analysis and came to the conclusion that this is not the way to move forward, and the importance of still focusing on the fact that it seems like this process was full of shenanigans and ridiculousness. I think we do need to continue to be focused on that. And I think that it highlights some of the things that may come up in some of our other stories about needing to be able to talk through things with people who might have differing opinions about what they're trying to accomplish without everybody just kind of pulling back to their stated party or position in kind of partisanship terms and refusing to even have a conversation about things. Because I think to the point of how processes going forward, they didn't learn their lesson about the fact that all those school board members have equal votes on these decisions. And in no way, shape, or form should this announcement have been made with just the president of the school board and the interim superintendent that is currently there. And that's kind of seems to be what happened.
Yeah, and to me, like, what I also find difficult about this, like, we're in the lowest of the low for public education, right? We had hundreds of teachers and concerned community members in Austin to advocate against this voucher bill. And what you're looking at is you kind of have 2 or 3 issues going on in public education. Keller ISD is a rich ISD where the average income of a kid who goes to Keller ISD and the average family who sends their kids to schools in Keller ISD is above the national average. It's not Southlake, it's not Colleyville, but it's close. And you're talking about their schools are having financial issues, but their it's not because of enrollment. It's because of the lack of funding we give to public schools. It's hitting everybody, that even places like Keller ISD where my enrollment is growing, but yet the cost to resource the growth is not within the budget that the state has given per pupil.
Yeah, that state allotment that hasn't been raised since 2019. And to your point that you made on a previous pod, that if you were to ask educators whether they needed more funding for things, they would be full-throatedly saying yes and sharing that is something that needs to happen.
Like a Keller ISD in any other state would be fine. Like they would be able to be funded because they are actually have the metrics of a successful school: increase in enrollment and high wealth families to support. Like there's no, besides Patriot Mobile taking over their board, which is a political problem, from the like nuts and bolts, Keller ISD should be a happy funded place. Where you go to like Fort Worth ISD, where there's also news and stories about our situation, we haven't even hit the vouchers hitting our situation, and ours is more of a charter school attack, right? We've doubled the amount of kids from Fort Worth ISD who now go to charter schools in the last 8 years. And so you're having thousands of kids now going to charter schools. So like the Fort Worth ISD attack of funding issues is, we're talking about 60,000 kids going to a school district that once had 90,000 kids. So you're having like the unenrollment problem, the charter school attack, which is very different than Keller ISD. And then you have, but once vouchers are here, both Fort Worth ISD and Keller ISD's issues, unless funding comes, gets exasperated, because now you're having Keller ISD people might be like, you know what? All this political stuff that pit our community in the news, I don't want anything to do with it. So now I'm going to choose my kid to just go to the private school, or we're going to homeschool, or we're going to do something of that nature. It's now going to could pull dollars out and just make it worse for Keller ISD. And you already see Fort Worth ISD looking to close schools, and we haven't even got to vouchers. So it's like, it's going to be interesting of like what happens to all of our schools, even the ones with the good metrics like Keller ISD, unlike the good metrics at Fort Worth ISD.
Yeah, and at the end of this article, or one of the parts of this article, talks about how every district school in Keller, Colleyville, and Southlake received an A rating from the state in 2022, and most received in the most recent accountability scorecards, while only 3 Fort Worth campuses earned the highest remark. So that was making me look at the line that they were drawing, and they were basically trying to split off the part of the district that struggles. They wanted to just be one of those more suburban districts that didn't have to take on the things that were in the more urban part of their district. Yeah. And that leads into some of the stuff that we're going to talk about in future stories too, about what is happening in the more suburban sprawl counties around the urban cores of Tarrant and Dallas County.
So before we get to those stories, let's go ahead. No. We'll jump to short story number 2.
So short story number 2 is kind of a catch up to a story that we've been following as well, in that the district attorney gets the case alleging child pornography in the Fort Worth Museum exhibit. Months after the Fort Worth police seized photographs featured in the Modern Museum of Art's exhibit investigating allegations of child pornography, Tarrant County District Attorney has confirmed that 2 reports connected to the case have been presented to his office, but then basically doesn't say anything else. And everybody is kind of basically saying no comment on pending investigations. I think there is also some confusion about what is available publicly and what has to go through an open information request. The Fort Worth Report has submitted several open records requests on this story and has run into both the city and the police department, I think, asking for an attorney general opinion as to whether or not these records need to be reported. But also this article highlights the fact that one of these incident reports was made publicly available on the public platform, and then taken down because it was not supposed to be, in their opinion. So I don't know if there's a whole lot to go into here other than just that that's kind of an update on that story. And to me, there was a lot of discussion about how we make people go and do these requests for open information requests to get information that should just be available on a public website that doesn't require staff time. And so I believe that both the Fort Worth Police Department and the City of Fort Worth have asked for an attorney general opinion on whether aspects of this need to be withheld from the public because of Texas Family Code. And my understanding of that code is that they worry about victims of child pornography being exposed during a case. In this situation, we're talking about works of art, photographs taken many, many, many years ago. And as we've said in numerous conversations about this topic, this has been adjudicated in several other locations and found to not be what it is that people are accusing it to be in this instance. But to me, it's not more interesting, but an interesting aspect of the story is, what does the city and or the police department go to the attorney general for, asking for information to be withheld, and when do they do that? Because it conflicts a little bit with in the past where I've heard the city indicating that it would like to just have information available to the public more easily so that they don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops and they don't have to take a bunch of staff time to respond to those things. And so while not totally tied to this case, I just think that's interesting because it's yet another example where both the city and the police department have kind of gone to the AG for an opinion.
I think the interesting part of the story, and it's that this has been going on due to Dallas Express and Tim O'Hare really attacking this artist and this exhibition in Fort Worth. We are talking about in this episode, is Fort Worth better off today? And this is another example of, I think we're now having to deal with the extremism of Tarrant County leadership wanting to attack city level things like our museums. And this is at the same time these Dallas Express, Tim O'Hare, Mercy culture actually gets supported and is really a part of the family branch of former Gateway Church pastor Robert Morris, who was indicted on 5 charges of indecency with a child. Robert Morris stepped down from his position after Cindy Clemenshire publicly accused him of sexually abusing her as a child in the 1980s, beginning when she was 12 years old. This is obviously national news because he's also a pastor and supporter to Donald Trump and on his cabinet for faith of some capacity. So this guy runs the largest church, and you're taking some artists' photos of their own kids when they were much younger and penalizing that. And it's the same people who support an actual person who is a child predator. And that to me is the part that's is challenging, because the Attorney General's office on Wednesday gives several dates between December 1982 and January 1985 in which Morris allegedly abused Clemenshire. And at the end of the day that's where I think, like, we are not shutting down that work. We're not shutting down what they do. And in fact, it's the same people who go to those churches to get endorsements who are challenging the modern.
So I believe that the other topic that has arisen for us in our conversations has been kind of the impact that some of the federal cuts have made on local organizations that are doing good work in our community. And the two articles that we're going to highlight today are one about North Texas Food Bank. It's disappointing. North Texas Food Bank loses a $2 million grant in federal funding cuts. The food bank serves thousands of families across North Texas, and they've just lost millions of dollars of federal funding, and they're unsure how they're going to make that up. And then there's also an article talking about Catholic Charities in Fort Worth, and I think we mentioned that they had decided to file suit about the funding that they lost. And now this article is saying that Fort Worth expects to get $47 million of the paused refugee funds after suing the federal government. But these both just highlight the fact that we rely a lot and speak to and point to the public-private partnerships that we have with our nonprofits and our other non-governmental entities, the private sector in Fort Worth, to deliver some of the social safety net things that are required in order to make sure that the least of us are not struggling. Although even with the federal funding, I think these issues struggle to be fully addressed in our community, as we all know. And with this federal funding and the purging of federal dollars from these nonprofits, are we going to continue to struggle, and how are we going to make up the difference, I think, is the overall concern in these.
I also want to talk about the funding for food banks and how that's $1 billion has cut and impacted Tarrant County. This was also led and supported by Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, which City Hall did a recognition of shining the nation colors to celebrate Brooke Rollins being the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture and being the first person from Fort Worth to have a presidential cabinet seat. And so we're celebrating the person who has agreed to take away millions of dollars from our Tarrant County Food Bank. That is actually a part of this that I think is missed within this entire conversation, how it's our own people, and then our own leadership is celebrating those people who are doing that. I want to kind of go into a bigger story that I saw in the Star Telegram. This is written by Tiffany Jackson. As cuts continue, one study looks at how much of each state relies on federal funding. The kicker here is what we have to understand is that Texas is in the middle of the pack. We're number 38 overall when it comes to the impact of federal funding. That is because Fort Worth obviously has a strong economy as its own. But most of the states that get impacted with the situations that's happening, we're talking Alaska, Kentucky, West Virginia, Mississippi, and South Carolina. All of those are red states. Now, when you look at the states that are least impacted, New Jersey, California, Delaware, Massachusetts, and Utah, 4 of the 5 states, and the other one funded by the Mormon Church, who is richer than Apple. What's crazy about all this is how much it's impacting red states who voted for this agenda, and Texas is only being held on to because we have an economy from the private sector. But we're also going to be impacted because of the whole thing with tariffs between Canada and Mexico. 50% of our GDP comes from doing business with Mexico. So we continue to shoot ourselves in the foot with hiring and being proud of leadership who takes money from food banks and stops us to do international business with people who actually really fund our GDP.
So my last take on the federal funding losses is that I've had a couple conversations with some folks about the cuts that the federal government is making, not just to the funding that they send to our nonprofits and other organizations in the community, but the cuts that they're making to these federal programs that are eliminating jobs for federal employees. And the fact that sometimes people look at government employees, air quotes, as, lesser or being, less qualified or whatever. But this is absolutely not the case. There are so many incredibly educated, qualified, highly trained people doing this work. And as these jobs are cut from the federal government, these folks are going to be looking for jobs elsewhere. And so while there's been a lot of haranguing about, worry that immigrants are taking our jobs, I think that people are going to be surprised by the competition that they're going to see from federal employees that are highly qualified and trained looking for jobs, and people might need to take that into consideration when they are not allowing these folks to do these jobs at the federal level. That they'll be looking for jobs in our communities, which is, and on the one hand, that's great. I'd love to have really highly educated and qualified folks coming and working in Fort Worth.
Yeah, and you're spot on. The amount of conversations I'm having with someone who is funded by a federal or local government who is now worried about their job and looking elsewhere, those are also some of the most talented people I know. Like, because what makes a good government employee is you have to be able to, one, be able to deal with an array of different departments and levers that moves things. So you have to understand a large landscape. Plus, you then have to have interpersonal skills to cross different, like interacting with different people and feeding egos. Then you have a minimum like budget. So then it's like you get access to a tons of data to analyze, but then you also have to have a marketing hat and the ability to then go communicate and advocate your thing to the city and make sure your project is elevated. So it's like the amount of like skills a government employee has, they're truly like a Swiss Army knife. And that, to me, if you're a private sector looking to hire people to do more and be able to have that ability, that's an ability that a lot of people don't have. They're like, I'm gonna do my job and I only do this one thing well. Government employees realize we don't have resources to hire a lot of specialists, so people are able to have to use their specialist degree, but then also they learn a ton of like their written ability. Like, I never like to get into an email conversation or a Discord conversation with government employees because they kick my ass. Like, I can't talk or type that fast or think that fast, and like there's 4 paragraphs later they have like executed a point. So it's just like the skill sets and the muscles that they've built by being in something and moving so fast and putting so much on them. These are some of the best people in our city.
And then they're compassionate people who are wanting to serve the public.
Yeah.
So they have that empathy, compassion side of things as well. So adding to that Swiss Army knife of skills and qualifications.
Yeah. So that's all a great point, which leads us to the big story. So the big story here, I'm going to highlight some stories, and then I'm going to pass it over to Ann, who had the privilege to attend the mayoral panel sponsored or facilitated by Leadership Fort Worth. But let me go ahead and hit some of the kicker points. First story I want to highlight is Dallas-Fort Worth is no longer leads the nation in population gain. Here's where we rank. Dallas-Fort Worth, Arlington metropolitan area is estimated to have 8.3 million people as of July 2024. It's held the growth title after it gained nearly 153,000 residents from July 2022 to 2023. DFW gained more new people the following year on 178,000 people, July 2023 to July 2024, but the region lagged behind New York and Houston's metropolitan area in numeric growth. Take a deeper look at the growth. What you see is that the number of growth in New York, New Jersey City was 213,000. Houston was 198,000. Dallas-Fort Worth was 177,000. On top of this, the other story I wanted to touch on briefly too, DFW's like migration patterns. This is a story by Jaime Carrillo. He talked about how Tarrant County in absolute terms had 114 and 411 new residents between 2020 and 2024. The assistant estimates the third largest population change in that time frame, behind Denton and Collin County. Tarrant County experienced the second largest population bump in the Metroplex between 2023 and 2024, only trailing Collin County. When you look at the map and you extend it, how much Metroplex has grown over the past 4 years, Collin County is at 179,000. Tarrant County is at 114,000. Denton County is at 130,000. So we would be, by the numbers of people, we would be third on the list. Then it really kind of drops because of Kaufman County, which by like percentage change is number one. That's Kaufman County with 50,660 people. But what's fascinating, and I'm going to put this in the show notes, is he breaks down in the story the growth in North Texas counties by percentage change. And it's based off of like a light blue to the darkest blue. And when you look at the counties, the majority of the dark blue is the suburbs of Dallas: Collin County, Hunt County, Rockwall, Kaufman, Ellis. Then the next kind of shade of blue is Wise County, Parker County, Johnson County, which is like the outskirts of Tarrant. But this kind of talks about the tug and pull between Dallas Fort Worth, DFW, and Dallas Frisco McKinney, DFM, and how really the Metroplex is having these two areas kind of spar out on growth and business locations. And we're getting, ultimately at the end of the day, the story is just showing how DFM is winning that story.
Well, it looks like it has happened on the Dallas side sooner than it happened on the Tarrant side. Dallas proper, I think, has been losing population and businesses to the more suburban counties around it. And Tarrant, while lighter, is kind of seems to be moving in that direction, which just goes back to our comments about suburban sprawl. And I don't know what the fix is, because we have such a property rights mentality that we allow people to develop where they want to develop. We don't have growth boundaries that some people do in order to try to restrict some of that. And all of the things that I advocate for and try to encourage, healthy growth of the urban core, public transportation and connected places, all struggles in the face of unfettered growth that can just go where it wants to go. And the city itself also goes out into all of those counties. There are 5 counties that are in the city of Fort Worth city limits. And so when all that population does come out and pop up in those areas, and the city's response is not to say, the tax dollars that you bring with your development do not cover the cost of providing the services which you are asking us to provide, so therefore we decline to provide those services to you. They allow that development to happen. That population grows up. Those people start insisting on services that their tax dollars are not covering, but now they're voting members of the city of Fort Worth and have influence and impact on elected officials being reelected. And so therefore they show up at bond meetings and they show up at their council members' offices saying, we want a community center like they have in this other location. We want police and fire covering response times like there are in other places. We want water and sewer and streets to be robust and connected in this far-flung area. And none of that is economically viable.
I would love, I don't know if Eleanor or Jaime or any reporters interested in doing this kind of data and doing the heavy lifting, as you all usually do, to keep society informed, why we should support local journalists. But I would like to look at the rate of tax dollars you receive per person in these counties. And I would even break it down by the city, because when I say DFM, Dallas Frisco McKinney, is superior to Dallas Fort Worth, is that yes, we're both having the sprawl happen. So that's like a behavior issue on housing. But to me, it's what do those suburbs even look like? In Frisco, the wealth and the businesses and the jobs that those people are receiving are leading to their neighborhood might have a Sweet Greens and a Cava, or, a Cava's kind of everywhere now, but they're getting an elevated, Flower Child in Frisco, Texas, where, wherever far-flung Fort Worth we want to call, we're getting
drive-through fast food restaurants.
a McAllister's Deli, because our suburban sprawl doesn't have the financial wallet. Yes, are there jobs up there because of Alliance, but most of those are manufacturing, logistics, and it's not near as lucrative as what you're seeing in Irving, what you're seeing in Frisco. And so the impact of what they receive is also not near the niceness of what you're getting in the DFM area. And I think that's also concerning too, is what kind of dollars are being moved out into the sprawl.
Well, and I think we had in the past some intentional planning where we put mixed use zoning into the further southwest Fort Worth area. And then as people moved out there and wanted things faster than was viable for a mixed use development to go in, because that's a more expensive development than, say, just a strip center with more kind of car-centric development, we whittled away at that zoning. So we had some mixed-use zoning in some of these more suburban parts of Fort Worth. But then when somebody came in and said, oh, well, we'll give you a Starbucks, but we want it to be with a drive-through around it, not connected to the neighborhoods in any kind of walkable, connected way other than driving in your car, those zoning cases were kind of dumbed down and those developments were allowed. And so that continued to emphasize just that car-centric type of development. And so that just further encourages the lesser quality, I think, of mixed-use development in those areas.
But I don't think Frisco was probably any better. I mean, I bet I think Frisco is an example of what the future city looks like with. That's Frisco skyline. I'm showing a picture which I'll put into. This is what Frisco looks like today. Like, look at those highways in the middle.
Dense.
Yeah, right. There's highways in the middle. There looks like
highways in the middle are not my favorite.
Yeah, I know. Okay. And then you got the Embassy Suites. You got a lot of.
Is that
stuff.
Really a 2-scale development though, or is picture, or is that just
that's
kind of
it. When you drive by Frisco,
it looks like that.
Yes, it is insane. It's a glass. We got one glass Texas A&M building finally getting built. That one Texas A&M building that looks innovative in our downtown. That's what Frisco's entire skyline looks like.
Well, you know what I think holds us back on that is this insistence that Fort Worth be historic and true to its roots of brick and historical type of architecture, because we're kind of a dip it in amber, don't let anything change mentality place. And when somebody comes in with something new and shiny and, in your words, innovative, they're like, oh, that doesn't look like Fort Worth. Don't Dallas my Fort Worth. So people have probably opposed things that have been more cutting edge in their architectural style.
Well, this goes now to, let's open it up. I want you to now talk about, you have been a resident in Fort Worth for over 3 decades. You have sat in a panel last week or this week where it was about the 4 mayors who ran the city, starting with Mayor Moncrief, yep. Mayor Barr, Mayor Betsy Price, Mayor Maddie Parker. You had hundreds of people in a full packed room hearing the state of Fort Worth, hearing it from their lens. Give to me, we're now on the topic of where is Fort Worth in the Metroplex and how is Fort Worth better post-pandemic, post-Betsy Price era Fort Worth?
So Leadership Fort Worth did a great job of bringing this panel of mayors together. And I've even heard some conversation in our Discord from some other cities in Tarrant County that were like, hey, this would be an interesting thing to do, say, in Arlington. Because it was, to your point, interesting to see the timeline that was provided in the brochure, which I neglected to bring with me today so that I could highlight specifics that were accomplishments of these 4 mayors and things that they are proud of, which they all touched on. And so for that, it was very interesting to see. And it actually clarified for me some things that I've been feeling kind of anecdotally in my continuing, I know it's probably a sickness, to watch city council meetings and zoning commission meetings, but the work that I'm doing now still kind of ties me to some of that work. And realizing, as someone who served previously and watching folks continue to serve now, about how sometimes some things never seem to change, that we continue to struggle with things that people took on as initiatives in their times of service that were improved in the moment, but maybe not held on to kind of systematically change the root cause of some of these problems and solve them going forward. So we continue to have to readdress them over and over and over again. So this leadership outlook from the mayor's desk was a panel of, like you said, the 4 mayors that have served. And it was moderated by Rose Bradshaw with North Texas Communities Foundation. And I enjoyed it thoroughly but also found it to be extremely frustrating because it did kind of put a fine point on something that I have been feeling is the case, that we continue to try to solve these problems because we don't put systems in place that move the needle and then keep track of the data of whether something that we've implemented is moving the needle And if something doesn't move the needle and it was controversial, somebody might just use that as a reason for not doing that at all. Whereas it could be something that we drill down into and try to figure out what worked, what didn't work, what could we continue to try to move forward and tweak and make better so that we can make those actual improvements.
I also said Mike Moncrief first. Kenneth Barr was 1996 to 2003. Mike Moncrief was 2003 to 2011. Betsy Price, 2011 to 2021. And Maddie Parker, 2021 beyond to now. But I really want to ask the question, and what's funny is I got to ask Michael Crane this question yesterday because we were at an event at the same time, and I said, how is Fort Worth better post the pandemic? Post new leadership after Betsy Price, what of Fort Worth is better?
And you were asking me this morning, like, as far as our neighborhoods, as far as our engagement.
As far as like, is downtown better today than it was then? And I think you do a great topic of like how much of it is the pandemic and us now being impacted by the pandemic.
And I also think that it's really important to not just be influenced by anecdotal stories that individuals are sharing on social media. I have a serious addiction to social media, and I need to probably quell that a little bit because it just gets me discouraged and makes it harder to continue to do the work that I want to do. But when people talk about kind of areas of town that have flourished in the past and areas of town that are up and coming and ones that are ebbing and flowing, I think all of that is a natural tendency to have happen. The ones that I have found that continue to not revert back to being completely, not doing well are the ones that have more intentionality around their planning. So like a near South Side, a downtown. But if you go on social media, you'll see people posting and saying downtown is dead. And I'm not going to get into all.
No, but I think those are like we and you. That was actually half of our heated battle before this. Was like I made a comment about Magnolia, about like the awful parking garage by JPS that is a huge eyesore right next to Mag and May Apartments. Keep going, fixture not there.
But there's something else there now.
I haven't been. So we don't. I hang out on Magnolia a lot because the restaurants I like to eat at. But I also, when I lived there in 2017 to 2019. I'm trying to think, was it better then than it was now? And like, I guess that's like, and then like, I also think of like South Main wasn't a thing and now it's a thing. And has South Main actually like, I like South Main better than Magnolia now. And so like that had to make a harm on Magnolia. We had a long talk in our Discord with other 817ers about TCU and the housing situation there, and the growth of TCU. So it's like, obviously Fort Worth is having more growth, or growth is here. But are we managing and funding and supporting programs or associations like Near South Side enough to actually,
The answer to that question is absolutely not. And I would say that, in fact, we should fund and manage and do more of that type of work so that those kind of things can be more successful. Those have been shown to be successful. There was a time when the Near South Side was criticized because some of their urban villages were not getting as much support and investment and public dollars from the TIF as others. And they did a whole analysis and showed where the dollars had gone over many years and said, okay, with the rest of the money that we have in this TIF, we're going to put more intentionality by putting some more into South Main, which is what made South Main take off and get to the point that you're talking about. And Magnolia has, it competes with itself sometimes. There's some poaching that goes on. There's places that move from Magnolia to South Main and vice versa. And so I think that's all ebbing and flowing. And I think that it doesn't take away from the intentionality and the work that is done by an organization like Near South Side, Inc. that helps that happen in a better way than, say, your suburban sprawl areas that don't have any of that. But the city of Fort Worth doesn't plan as well as it should, and doesn't put actual dollars behind the things that it needs to in order to realize those kind of accomplishments.
And I guess I'm just going back to, and I totally agree with you, right? But it's like,
It's a reaction versus a proactive.
yeah, but is downtown more lively today than it was pre-pandemic?
I
I
would
don't
say
know.
we're still recovering from the
Yeah, yeah.
pandemic, and we're also going through some serious construction things that are happening down there, like A&M and
Yeah.
Convention Center, that impact that. When those things are done, and the things that are happening in Sundance and all of that are going and blowing, the combination of those things that tourists come in and frequent and go to. And, we were having a discussion about whether those are local people that are down there or whether it's all tourists.
Yeah.
And I have been to many events that they're having in Sundance now that are much more diverse than they used to be. And so I think that there are more people from the community coming to some of those more diverse events that speak to people, with Hispanic culture and Black culture than were happening before. And like I said, I'm not going to get into the management of Sundance Square, but I think they have plans that do support
you're right.
those things.
I agree. I understand that. Could post-pandemic Fort Worth be building for a future that right now we're going kind of through the growing pains of, because it's going to be nicer.
But to your point about the Mammoth parking garage that's affiliated with JPS, because we continue to cling to car-centric and having to respond to wanting everybody to have some place to park their individual cars, we continue to support the type of development that kills the mixed-use walkable type of development that we want.
Yeah.
So we are responding. People drive their cars. You have to have spots for 900 people to park in this expanded JPS that we're going to have. We're putting money into that parking garage instead of putting money into public transportation and other ways for people to get to those places.
Yeah.
And so we're shooting ourselves in the foot in some of that. But then it's the chicken or the egg that I get into arguments with people that I know believe in what I'm trying to do with the public transportation side of things, who say, oh, yeah, Ann, but we still have to deal with allowing people to park their cars. And I'm like, if we continue to do that, we're never going to get to the other.
What I'm trying to figure out then is, so downtown is still recovering from the pandemic. Is Magnolia South Side, I guess you can argue, is better because there was no South Main really before the pandemic. And that's a great addition of
And there's
Fort Worth.
Park Place too.
Yeah. And
Massive
Park Place.
stuff has happened in Park Place that wasn't there before.
Now give me the whole what's going on
And
with
Vickery.
Give me the whole TCU.
So to your
challenge.
point about growth and impact and neighborhoods and positives and negatives, there was a huge discussion on Discord about TCU's impact on the surrounding neighborhoods. Part of it, I think, was sparked off by an initial article where TCU has been out on the street sharing their master plan for their university and the growth that they anticipate kind of going down Berry Street on that side of university. For years and years and years, TCU was saying that they were going to stay kind of a smaller university. They were going to try to grow their on-campus housing, have all of their, as close to all of their students living on campus as they possibly could. They've grown it from freshmen to freshmen and sophomores, but they've struggled to even house freshmen and sophomores. And there's been a continued conversation. I mean, transparency. I live near TCU. So the growth and the impacts on neighborhoods and the collaborations between neighborhoods and the ebbs and flows of positive things have all been in my backyard. And I served on the council and represented neighborhoods around TCU. So you can't fix everything with regulations, but we've attempted to do some of that. But it goes back to that thing that I pointed out about initiatives started by different mayors, that if you don't put structure in place that carries those things forward, so that when somebody who's in that role and is doing a rock star job of it moves on, that can be carried on by someone. And in the TCU instance, there was a lot of student housing popping up in the neighborhoods around TCU. They were really incompatible with the surrounding houses because they were basically 5-bedroom, 5-bath houses. Students have lived in the neighborhoods around TCU for years and years and years, but they lived in the houses that existed there. And so that impact wasn't as big. When developers started to notice that they could make money building housing for students and realized that you could build a 5-bedroom, 5-bath house in a single family neighborhood because you were allowed to have up to 5 unrelated individuals living in a single family home. They took advantage of that and started building some of that, and that was negatively impactful to the neighborhood. So in an attempt to quell that, we put in place the TCU overlay that restricted, in single family zoning, only up to 3 unrelated individuals. But we also upzoned some of the area that's adjacent to Berry Street to allow more smaller apartments and duplexes and all of that sort of thing. And so some of that development is happening in that area, but that was intentional. Like, we put form-based code along Berry Street and encourage that development to happen there to have less of a negative impact in the core of the single family neighborhoods. And I think that has been successful to a certain extent. What hasn't been carried on is, like I said, that passing the torch to people who are now in the seats. They weren't there for the battles of putting the zoning in place and the overlay in place and putting together the neighbor to neighbor program, which was successful when it was robustly run. And I think some of that, everybody has to recognize that this is something that needs to be done every single year, because there's new students that come every single year. There's new residents that move into neighborhoods every single year, and learning to get together and teaching what it's like to be a good neighbor and supporting each other is something that takes an intentional relationship building from all sides, the city, the university, and the leaderships in neighborhoods around the university. So I think the Berry Street redevelopment
Berry could be a good opportunity,
a positive thing. They are planning more housing along Berry Street that is going to be on the side that is TCU's campus. It's not in the neighborhoods. The side that we rezoned that allowed some higher density to go in goes all the way from University down to Cleburne 8th Avenue, and there's a train station proposed to be at that intersection. And so all of that can be supported by transit if we continue to advocate for the multimodal transit that we need in order to support this type of mixed-use development.
Another segment that I thought was interesting, talking to a person who listens to the pod, and they talked about Montgomery Street, and I know you're passionate about that one as well, where, I'm sad that the Antique Mall is no longer going to be there, because it was such a it is, and one of my favorite experiences, to take people who are not at Fort Worth to eat lunch at the Tea Garden in the Antique Mall. But we have Dickies Arena now, and with Dickies Arena in Montgomery, there's no real entertainment district that's like walkable or able to take the Dickies Arena crowd away from just going straight to their cars to go back home, because there's so much easy access to I-30. What is the opportunity you see with that street as well?
So Montgomery Street was redesigned when Dickies was built, and all the businesses that existed along Montgomery Street had to suffer through the construction that was going on. I went to an art gallery opening on Montgomery Street just a couple of days ago, and that the owner was talking about how they made it through all of that. But it is still a straightaway street that doesn't have like the bulb outs and different things to calm traffic like some of the other streets that we've done. And so while the speed limits, and many people have come to realize this when they've gotten a speeding ticket, while the speed limit is signed at like 30 miles an hour, people definitely go faster than that when it's not congested. And so it's not the most walkable environment. Plus, the zoning along that street has included a combination of all the way up to industrial zoning. So when the Dries Hotel was built, that property was zoned industrial. And the nearby neighborhood in that situation has become accustomed to feeling as if they have to fight every single change that is proposed, because they believe that it's going to be encroachment into their neighborhood and negatively impactful into their neighborhood, that they literally fought the Dries Hotel, which
is our entertainment district to Dickies Arena.
Has come to the conclusion that that was the right thing to do and that it should be supported. But that antiquated zoning still exists along Montgomery Street. And interestingly enough, there's been a council-initiated rezoning along that entire street that went to the zoning commission just last week. And it was a combination of things that included some planned development zoning, and it was kind of a little bit piecemeal in my estimation. And so that's another street that could absolutely benefit from a more cohesive kind of form-based code that would support development that would make it a mixed-use walkable area that could be a more entertainment district, but not negatively impact the adjacent neighborhood, because it is a single-family neighborhood that is adjacent to it on the west. And so these are all just conversations that need to be able to be had where people don't get triggered and think they have to fight something. Let's figure out what are the struggles that you face every day. I would assume that struggles are that having Dickey's Arena there has people kind of coming through the neighborhood, parking in the neighborhood, driving in and out quickly, which Dickey's has got it down to get people in and out quickly. I mean, you leave that arena after an event and they've got cones everywhere and they just, like you said, direct you straight out of the neighborhood. But if there were things along that corridor, if you could get to that corridor via public transportation, which you can actually, and then go to other businesses along there, it could be positive for everybody. And then leave the area via public transportation, not have everybody come park.
Yeah. So do you feel, okay, so we feel that neighborhood growth and neighborhood design is on the up and up, and we're making some right investments.
I think it can be if we
space.
continue to do those right investments and that right planning.
And that's where I feel like I think overall, if I was looking at that mayoral panel, which I wasn't at, is that we are trying to build a more efficient government, lower property taxes, TAD every 3 years, schools closing in walkable areas. We are
reducing the capacity of government.
That then helps us actually build the design of the city that you're talking about. And that is the iceberg that we're about to hit. And therefore, how do you argue universities are at a better place today? Because that's more state level, like issues for our universities. How are LGBTQ people more safe in Fort Worth today? How are Black communities supported today? Because our pod, we get a bunch of text messages. We get a bunch of DMs. We get a bunch of people wanting to talk to us. And my things I hear is, I'm losing my funding. I don't know where I'm going to get funding. I'm losing my job. People, if it's a Black or brown entrepreneur, I'm struggling for people to remember that we're still here now that George Floyd is over. And
wave. DEI is being erased from every single thing.
DEI is being taken from every single thing. But then you're seeing nonprofit leaders having to deal with that and their new boards. I would argue the Tarrant County pressure on Fort Worth is the other thing that's making our city inability to do this reimagination that you're talking about, is because Tim O'Hare's and the Mercy Culture and that committee, how does the Fort Worth corporate elite manage those guys? Are we, I've heard talks of Hillwood making some movement possibly of starting to develop downtown near A&M. That would be interesting. But you have that big development in Alliance. You're going to compete with, like what you said, like Alliance is our Frisco. And so does the way you saw the lightest color of that blue on the Jaime's article on Star Telegram was Dallas County. And that was because of the sprawl and developing richer, nicer things in a Frisco that they wanted. And they're no longer going to Dallas. They're building, Apostle McKinney Airport. There's the soccer team up there now. That could happen to Fort Worth too.
This was all highlighted at the council meeting work session a couple of weeks ago when the proposed bond for 2026 was presented to the council. And the immediate response from some of the folks that represent the north part of Fort Worth was, there's not enough in that bond for us, and you're going to have a hard time getting our people to support that. And it was pointed out by somebody who represents the core of the city that in past bonds, more funding has gone to the north to address what they saw as disparities of roads that they haven't had funded in the past, and that you can't get the same amount from every bond going forward. But there also is the importance of looking at the city as a whole and not just looking out for the interests of the specific residents of one area. Because with a core that is not flourishing, that's negatively impactful on the entire city. And so to get specific and just say, I'm only here to support things that are going to bring dollars to my residents physically in our district is not conducive to the overall flourishing of a city. But that's kind of where we've gone. It's like, if it doesn't support my frame of thinking on these cultural issues, then I'm going to fight it. If it doesn't support my way of thinking of my district, then I'm not going to be supportive of it. And it just has kind of continued to put those splits between groups and led us away from working together. And it just makes all the work that we're doing harder, but I don't think we can stop.
And Fort Worth feels to me we are really reliant on like big institutional anchors. Like, we're not, our money isn't that dispersed. Like, so if something falls, we really feel it. I think we're a highly federal dollar support in a lot of things. If it's our nonprofits, if it's our churches, charities, if it's Texas A&M. I mean, Texas A&M is not a business that is moving into our downtown, which is a good thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's not a company. Our city hall purchased Pier 1 building, not a company. We're held up by a lot of I don't know, all of our Republicans are hard pro-business, pro-capitalism, but like none of those folks are holding up Fort Worth, the city part. And I just like, I feel like Fort Worth lacks that that liveliness that you're just seeing in other areas where the Texas is getting a stock exchange, right? Dallas is getting a stock exchange. You got in Goldman Sachs, Toyota, like all these other large organizations, and I just feel like Fort Worth, it is still missing a aliveness from business people and entrepreneurship, and that being in the core of the city. The medical district, TCU, like everything that's being built in Fort Worth is by these legacy things that hold us up, but it's not new big players coming in to like. I see the opportunity of Fort Worth, and I want to build this thing up to what it could be. Like, right, so eventually people came to Austin and said, we're building here in Austin. Salesforce, right? Like, I see this thing, and that is what Fort Worth doesn't have right now is.
And I think some of it is those amenities that those kind of people are looking for that we have underfunded or outright fought against because we saw it as change that was going to ruin our small town character and take away our friendliness and the things that we cling to. And I think we can do both things.
I would say another one. Schools, are they better today than they were pre-pandemic?
Again, underfunded, undersupported, yes. And left to their own devices, and then blamed for the failures.
Yeah. So it's like, anyways, obviously I would love to hear other people's discussions or topics about, do you feel Fort Worth is better today than it was, pre-pandemic or post-Betsy Price? And I just think that's like, I'm just interested in that story of what is the pitch that Fort Worth is better today, because and again, federal and state is really making it hard for local to be healthy and successful. I'm not blaming us directly, but it still feels like a ghost town with a couple Yellowstone players and characters who run a couple things. And
then it runs its course.
Yeah, and it runs its course, and
we have to find something else.
Yeah, and it just does it again. And so that's kind of the thing. But I know we're going long, and so we need to move to wins and losses. Obviously, this is a discussion we've had before, and we'll continue to have on the pod. So if you like these kind of conversations about designing a Fort Worth, you're at the right spot. Now we're going to move into wins and losses. This is where we share a loss first, and then we end on a high note with our wins. I will start with my loss. My loss is that recently there was a news article that started really hitting the ground pretty quickly this weekend when 50 dogs were seized from a Watauga home. 50 Rottweilers and other dogs rescued in this animal cruelty case. It's pretty horrific. This lady was playing as a rescue for Rotties, and I mean, she had kennels with mounts of poop and pee, and dogs massively under malnourished. She was a part of North Texas Giving. I know me and my wife were really big Rottweiler family. We are in a place where we're on a month of losing our girl Sega, who was a Rottweiler, a rescue Rottweiler from Grand Prairie, and I think about the chances of her being in this space or being in this place with this lady. If people who don't foster or adopt larger dogs, like Rottweilers, who are often seen as, once they're adults and they come into the system, are they dangerous, or are they? And so these dogs need rescue. They need saving. We have to support our humane societies. And to me, I'm someone who believes that we have to understand that humans, I think Fort Worth does this and humans do this, is that we hide our ugliness. And one of the ugly things about humanity that they will write about in the history books is that we kill 2,000 dogs every single day in America. And we continue to allow us to breed dogs. And that is something that I think will be a scar to us, the same way other things, like how do they keep doing this? Because we don't really see or know that, and we think we're just getting a dog, but those are real impacts. So I just think that we should be okay with adopting dogs and not allowing cruelty happen like this. I mean, there was people who know about this for a long time, and because we don't have the capacity to fund or stand up or advocate, this lady was able to do this for a very long time. This lady's name was Sherry Pruitt Green, so if you have any information or understanding of what was happening, again, 50 dogs kenneled inside of a house. None of the neighbors knew that these dogs were in there. So that means these dogs weren't going outside. These dogs weren't walking. Then using the charity or the funding to live and figure out her life. This is some dark stuff that has happened to animals we all love. And I love seeing people walking their dog and just getting to say hi to their dog and meeting people's new dogs. So we know how important dogs are to the well-being of us humans, and we got to treat them better.
So my loss and my win are going to be tied together just a little bit because I just kind of came up with it at last minute. But my loss is twofold, and it has to do with driving. There was an article about a Chick-fil-A expanding their drive-through lanes and making it more efficient for people to get through at the drive-through, which just highlighted to me our continued focus on car culture. And then you shared an article about U.S. driving log has gone up to 3.28 trillion miles in 2024. So I think that just highlights
the most driven year in human
ever.
history in America.
So we're all just driving more, which means we're sitting in metal boxes on roads, stuck in congestion, probably for the most part. So that's my loss, is that, and to the point about the building parking garages and having them be the prominent fixture of a development, places to store and house cars that 90-something% of the time sit unused, I think is not efficient. And if we're trying to do things financially more efficiently and health more efficiently, because air quality, we haven't attained that here locally in the Metroplex in years and years and years, and all of that. So I'll talk more about my win if you want me to go directly into that. And that is that we are having a transit transportation mixer on March 19th, which will be Wednesday after you hear this pod on Monday. And we've had really great turnout at our mixers so far because there is pent up support for transportation and other than driving and transit in our communities. And we are going to have somebody visiting us from the Dallas side of the Metroplex that is going to share with us places that you can advocate for more transit in our legislature at this moment. Hopefully at some point we will move to a what can we come out and be in favor of and support and be positive about, and away from having to fight all the bad stuff that is reducing and cutting. At this moment, we are in a fight the reducing cutting moment because there are folks that want to continue to not fund transit and to even reduce the transit that we already have. And so there's some bad bills that we need people to be aware of. But if you want to learn more about that, come out and talk to other people who are excited about transit and multimodal transportation in our communities on Wednesday, the 19th.
I love it. And my win is going to go to a Fort Worth 8th grader who leads campaign to educate immigrant families. A student who worked from Basin Preparatory Bolt Academy campus. They were working to provide families with information and how it was a student-driven effort aimed to helping families to mitigate the fear of deportation and giving them confidence on how to navigate the uncertain terrain of Trump's administration. I just think, again, we talk about literacy. You're having the fear of even sending your kid to school. An ICE person can come and take your kid at any time from a school, a church, a hospital. These are not good times, but to see kids constantly figuring out ways to solve these problems, it's just super sweet to see them trying to mobilize and help their own community. And obviously, the future generation always gives us hope. There you guys have it. Welcome to the 817 podcast. If this was your first listen, make sure you subscribe. If you're a OG, make sure you leave a comment or rate. Getting more people aware of this, those actually help. And as you guys know, we're coming up to 5 years of doing the 817 podcast. And not once have you heard a sponsorship. Not once have you heard anything about a Patreon or needing anything. Because this is just a passion project that we get to do on the weekends, and we're just Fort Worthians like you trying to show that we care. Also, you probably would have missed our 817 gather that we had this weekend as well, but we're having our 817 gathers every third Sunday of every month where progressive, future-driven, conscious Fort Worthians come together to realize that we can mobilize together. So would love to see you at those as well.
While I haven't been involved in the 817 podcast for all 5 years, it has been a real great honor to do this work with you. And it has given me a platform to continue to elevate the things that are important to me in this community and to connect more with other people who are as well. So I just like to express my appreciation for everybody who is a podcast listener that I meet out in the community on the regular. I'm constantly having people come up to me these days and say, I love the podcast. I heard you on the podcast. So it's been really great.
All right, beautiful people. See you next time.